So our keynote address focuses on the past and current efforts to curtail nation cyber attacks on private sector core infrastructure of the internet. Our speaker, Bill Woodcock, is uniquely qualified to give this talk as the executive director of Packet Clearinghouse. So Bill got involved in the internet back in 1985, helping establish nearly 300 internet exchange points. In those early days, he also developed the Anycast routing technique that now protects the domain name system. He was one of the principal drivers of the world's first anti-spam legislation. He was principal author of Multicast DNS. In 2002, he co-founded iNock DBA, a security coordination hotline that interconnects the network operation centers of more than 3,000 ISPs around the world. Today, Bill focuses on principally on the security and the economic stability of critical internet infrastructure. He serves on the Global Commission on the Security of Cyberspace and the Commission of the Caribbean Communications Resilience. He's also on the board of directors for the M3AA Foundation. So with that introduction, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome to the Black Hat stage, Bill Woodcock.
Thank you very much. Howdy. So, I think I'll begin by giving you guys a little bit of a history of why I find this issue interesting. In the 1980s and 1990s, I operated an internet service provider in the United States and Western Europe. And that was a time before the internet was really popular. It was a time when it was a fairly closed community of interest. We were doing it because we found it fascinating. Nobody at that time really thought that there was any money in it. And it was a community of like-minded people where there was a lot of trust. And you'll see when you go back and look at the protocols that haven't changed much since that time, just how much trust was extended. So when we started seeing a lot of hits on our access lists, on our routers, and the routers of our customers, it was a bit of a surprise. I mean, not a complete surprise. We put the access list there for a reason, right? But the numbers started climbing over time. And because there weren't a lot of security incidents yet back then, we had time to investigate and look into where these were coming from. And by the mid-1990s, there were quite a lot of attacks against civilian infrastructure, against internet service providers, coming out of the US and Russian military. And, you know, you'd try and have conversations about this and, you know, escalate up through your elected politicians or law enforcement or whatever, and things would just hit a dead end, or you'd, you know, in very informal circumstances at conferences and that kind of thing, you corner somebody and they would just kind of laugh it off and say, you know, it's just cyber. No, well, they didn't use the word cyber at the time. It's just the information superhighway. Nobody's going to get hurt, right? It's not like this affects anybody really, right? This is just stuff you're fooling around with, and we're fooling around. And so, you know, what does it hurt if we try and knock over your routers or try and you know, get into your servers? That wasn't a very satisfying answer, of course. And by about 2000 and 2001, the Chinese government had started engaging in this also. And the Chinese government was much more focused. They were, rather than going after the infrastructure, they were going after the customers, the enterprises, and trying to get into servers and pull out documents, right? Financial documents, engineering documents, so forth. So this started to take up quite a bit of time and energy. So at that point, a lot of us started pushing for a more a more formalized response to this, a diplomatic treaty or norm that would govern the use of cyber offensive tools and techniques. So that's what I'm going to try and talk about today. I'm going to spend a bit of time illustrating more modern examples, not from the 1980s and 90s, of why this is an issue and what kinds of attacks I think are the most damaging to the internet economy and the trust of the user community in the internet. And they'll talk a bit more about what the efforts to remedy all this have looked like. So if we rewind back to 2007, that was the first time this kind of thing came onto a lot of people's radar, because that was when the Russians attacked Estonia. So it was the first major cyber attack by one nation state on a whole other country. Estonia had just joined NATO, so they were expecting to be able to take advantage of collective defense. Yet when they contacted NATO, NATO said, "What? Cyber what did you say?" And didn't do anything. Which, of course, is very much playing into the hands of the Russians, who like to be clever, right? The Russians also launched a lot of that attack from botnets in the United States, so that when people in the US said, "Oh, what are you doing attacking Estonia?" They said, "What do you mean, us attacking Estonia? This was the US attacking Estonia. We can see those botnets." That kind of thing has played out over and over since. The sort of wink, wink, no, it wasn't us, wink, wink, which makes, in combination with the attribution is difficult problem, it makes this sort of thing difficult to deal with diplomatically. The next year, in Georgia, they accompanied a military attack with a cyber attack, and that cyber attack was directed both, again, as in Estonia, both at the government and at the private sector infrastructure in Estonia, or in Georgia. So the thing is that those two attacks received a lot of press coverage, but during that 2-year period, there were 14 other major attacks by the Russians against civilian internet infrastructure. Those were just two. They were two of the large ones, but they were also the two that received a lot of attention because governments felt like they were being attacked. The private sector, of course, had been getting attacked regularly for 10 to 15 years before that, but that doesn't make the press as much. There are a lot of reasons why private sector organizations don't like to publicize it when they're attacked, particularly if they don't have a solution to the problem, because it's a government and the government isn't going to stop. Then we start to get into the kinds of attacks that Snowden was disclosing the existence of. 2009, Stuxnet, U.S. and Israeli attack against Iran. This is really characteristic of the problem, the hubris of cyber offensive military folks. They figure, well, we're going to go out and buy 4 or 5 new 0 days, and we're going to throw them all together into one huge package, and we're going to get all our lawyers to sign off on this and say it's okay because we've been so careful and we are so smart that nothing could possibly go wrong, right? This will never have any effect on anything other than a few centrifuges in Iran. It'll never get out, right? Nobody will ever see this code. Nobody will ever take it apart and use it to do other bad things. And so that we see play out over and over as well. The militaries thinking that they're the smartest people in the room, that they are going to be able to use hacks that they didn't even think up themselves, they just bought. and that nobody is going to be able to figure it out. Nobody is going to be able to figure out what they're doing or pin it on them. It's never going to leak out. It's never going to affect anybody other than their intended target. Their intended target is who they think it is. They're going to deliver it properly, right? But none of that ever works out the way they think. So from my point of view, the big problem with Stuxnet was not attacking Iran. I've got other problems with, picking fights and attacking other countries and so forth, but that's not an argument any of us are going to win, because governments in a Westphalian society all agree that they have the right to go beat on each other, and that as citizens, we don't have any say in that matter. They also agree that they're supposed to be beating on each other, that is, government versus government, military versus military, not versus civilians, right? So they're ignoring the portion of that says that they're not supposed to be attacking civilians when they do cyber attacks. But there are also parts that are sort of impossible to ignore. And the thing about Stuxnet that was, I would say, a more problematic meta-attack against the civilian internet infrastructure was the way the attack was crafted. They broke into J-Micron and Realtek, Taiwanese device driver manufacturers, and stole their private keys in order to be able to sign things to make them look like those device drivers so that they would be accepted in the target computers. So that's the US government attacking two completely unrelated, uninvolved Taiwanese commercial companies, stealing their private keys and using those to impersonate those companies, destroying the trust that their customers have in them in order to conduct this attack. But what could go wrong? Because nobody will ever find out, right? Nobody will ever hear about this. So that's what I find most troubling about that class of attack, the kind of thing that is all over the Snowden disclosures, is this very cavalier attitude towards the trust that the private sector has to have in their vendors and between vendors and customers. So there were a series of other attacks very similar to that. So Flame in 2010, again, that's sort of US versus Iran, I think. Not a big expert on this, but that one was US government impersonating a Microsoft certificate to sign things saying that, yes, this is Microsoft Windows Update, here. US government attacking one of the US's largest private sector companies in order to make bad things happen elsewhere, because of course nobody will ever find out, right? Then in 2010 we found out that they were also intercepting Cisco routers in the post between Cisco and customers and installing hardware bugging devices into them. As an infrastructure operator, I'd be pretty lost if I couldn't order a Cisco router and throw it in and route packets, right? That trust is something that Cisco has had to work very, very hard to rebuild with its customers, and that was completely outside of its control. Again, 2010, 2011, GCHQ, the British intelligence agency, and the NSA working together broke into Gemalto, the SIM card manufacturer, to compromise them in order to get keys to allow them to decrypt conversations on the fly, so phone conversations. So again, this is the Brits in this case attacking one of their own largest, most trusted private sector manufacturers, destroying the trust between that private sector manufacturer and their customers, because who would know? Then in 2011, Iran attacks DigiNotar, issues a bunch of certs. DigiNotar, pretty well trashed reputation in the course of that. The certificate authority system is pretty well riddled with holes already, but that one was that made it pretty clear. And then there's the Chinese attack against RSA, also in 2011, where we find out that RSA kept big tables of the seeds and keys and so forth for all those tokens that they had been issuing people for theoretically secure remote login. So all those weren't usable anymore, weren't trustable anymore, and that was basically the foundation of RSA's business, was those tokens. Again, in this case, it wasn't a country, a national government attacking something in their own country, but there are plenty of Chinese folks who were dependent on RSA tokens also. So it's not something that would have been considered a legitimate target in kinetic warfare, right? The Chinese government are not going to go out of the blue and blow up RSA's offices, right? That would clearly be a violation of pretty much every standard of morality and international law and military law and so forth. Yet, no problem to do it in cyberspace. And even the purely military operations are not without consequence. So the U.S. sort of continued provocation of Iran, picking on Iran incessantly for years. Eventually, the Iranians, after trying to address this diplomatically and so forth, said, well, if you're not listening to diplomacy, we're going to do a limited counterattack. And so every Tuesday and every Thursday for years, the Iranians would counterattack against U.S. financial sector, U.S. banks. And so the U.S. banks, of course, went to the U.S. government and said, hey, come on, why are you beating them up if they can't get you to listen and they have to attack us to get us to go lobby you? This is ridiculous. Stop. But they didn't stop. They kept on year after year. So that's a little bit more complicated, right? That's sort of three legs of a feedback loop rather than just two. But it's exactly the same effect, right? U.S. government action having a huge financial consequence for U.S. private sector, and there's no consequence for them. There's no feedback loop. There's nothing telling them, stop, that hurts. So then, moving into more current day, in 2015 and 2016, we had the attack that was usually called Indestroyer, the Russian attack taking down the power grid in the Ukraine. And so this is whole cities, millions of people out of power for hours, or in one case 3 days at a time. That has very real consequences. Hospitals and emergency services out of power, schools out of power. This is the kind of thing that causes lives to be lost through accident or poor preparation or whatever. In a modern society, in a city, we're not prepared to live without power for extended periods of time. And the Russians said, who, us? It was just a demonstration. If it was, whoever did it, they must have just been doing a demonstration. Saying cyber has no consequence, it's a little late for that. And then 2016, 2017, there's Petya, not Petya. Those, again, were intended to be Russia versus Ukraine, but like Stuxnet, like all of these military things that are supposed to be targeted, that are supposed to be secret, that are supposed to be operating within some sort of framework of military law and morality, of course it gets out and affects lots and lots and lots of other people. And of course, there's no reeling that back in. There's no undecrypting things that are trashed. So where does that leave us as a private sector? We're all spending a lot of money to try and defend ourselves against attacks that are being conducted using the tax money that we're paying to our governments. This is not a fight we can really win on those terms, right? If we're paying for our governments to attack us and we're paying to defend ourselves against those attacks, and they get promotions when they do them because, offense is cool and it's easy, and nobody gets rewarded for doing defense because that's boring and it's expensive. So nobody in the military likes doing defense. They all want to go attack things because that's when they get ribbons. So where that leaves us is we're having to spend a huge amount of money, and that money is money that is not going to making the internet faster or bigger or better or more available to more people. So the networks that I run, because we have a lot of critical infrastructure on them, we have to try and ride out as much of this stuff as we can. And so we have to overbuild 1,000 to 1. An enterprise network, is going to have a different risk calculus. An enterprise network might get a serious attack, once a year or something. It depends a lot on the industry and the size and so forth. And, they're going to have an insurance policy that's going to cover some of their losses if and when that happens. And so they balance out with a different investment ratio there, but they're still over-investing against these attacks, maybe 5 to 1, maybe 10 to 1. That's all money that they could be putting into other things more usefully. For us, at 1,000 to 1, we could be providing service in 1,000 times as many locations. We could be operating name servers in 1,000 times more cities. We could be providing service faster to more people. We could be addressing the digital divide more successfully. But instead, we're having to build things way, way, way bigger than they need to be to provide actual service at huge cost. So let's get back to what's being done about this, other than just throwing money at it and hoping it doesn't get worse. In 1998, Russia proposed in the UN a treaty on cyber conflict or cyber aggression or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of people were very skeptical because Russia had, of course, been one of the principal instigators of the problem that they were proposing a treaty on. But when you look at how these treaties work and what was being proposed and so forth, there are two problems, two loopholes there. One is that the language is always very carefully crafted to try to institutionalize the status quo, right? To say what's happening right now is the default, and we shouldn't expect anything better than that. The other is that many countries, the US, China, and Russia, perhaps foremost among them, happily sign treaties which they then do not abide by themselves. So the fact that Russia was proposing a treaty in 1998 should not really be taken as any evidence of goodwill or evidence that they were trying to lead morally in this area, especially given, what they've done since then, the 20 years. Nevertheless, that got people thinking. And governments are not interested in the internet multi-stakeholder governance model, because then they have to deal with annoying internet network operators who have skin in the game or are unhappy with them. They have to deal with civil society, who try to hold them to account morally. They have to deal with little countries, the sort of countries that they think shouldn't matter, right? Instead, what they really like is the United Nations, because it's their thing. They've got a lot of rules. They've got sort of balances of power within it. They know how to have those fights. So between 2004 and 2017, there were 5 efforts to come up with some sort of consensus about what should happen here. And in 2017, beginning of 2017, it was recognized that these were not coming towards consensus. They were not converging. They were not making more progress year over year. The problem basically being that we have 3 governments in the world, maybe 4 if you count Israel, maybe 5 if you count Iran, that value their ability to attack other things on the internet more highly than the safety and economic stability of the internet in their countries. So US, Russia, China don't want to agree to any treaty that would limit their ability to conduct offensive cyber operations, because they would still do the offensive cyber operations, and then they would look bad for violating the treaty that they signed. Yet the entire rest of the world looks at this 1,000-to-1 overspending ratio and says, this is ridiculous, right? Digital divide. We are not getting our share of the pie because everybody has to spend all their money defending against these attacks that you're doing. So, around 2015, the Dutch government started an effort to get other like-minded countries, starting with notably Singapore and France, to have an effort outside of the United Nations that could come to not unanimity, because they knew that they were not going to get unanimity with the US and China and Russia being able to participate, but instead something more like the kind of consensus that we operate the internet on. Most people agreeing. Most people who have skin in the game coming to a shared understanding about what's right. And so that effort was formalized at the beginning of 2017, last year, as the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, the GCSC. And I am one of the commissioners, as is Jeff Moss. There are, I think, about 25 commissioners, so it's a pretty big commission. Pretty much everybody else on the commission is a diplomat or a military lawyer. And the effort has been to try to be inclusive, to keep the US and Russia and China engaged. And the Chinese and Russian participation has been very quiet. They're in the room, they're watching. The US participation has been very loud and in the gosh, this whole effort, I don't know, I'm not sure why we're doing this, it's not going to work anyway, didn't you see what happened in the United Nations, blah, blah, blah. So where we're at is we last July agreed that we were going to split into 2 working groups. One working group, which was basically composed of diplomats, would agree on what the text of a norm should say. So a norm is not a treaty. A treaty is a commitment that a bunch of countries sign that they agree that they will translate into local law, that will be binding upon them domestically. When the European Union passes something EU-wide, the treaties that govern European nations' participation in the EU say that they will take that and they will translate it into local law and make it apply. And thus, in theory, you have the same thing everywhere, even though it's in different languages with different legal regimes and so forth. The problem with a treaty is that it's difficult to get countries to agree to treaties because it puts a lot of work back on them to turn that into local law. And everybody knows that that's going to turn out differently in different places, even if that wasn't the goal. And because of that work and that commitment, it's something that diplomats can't do by themselves. They always have to take it back to the domestic politicians to sign off on. So it's a very high bar. And it's not something, as you've seen with climate change treaties, right? It's not something that's easy to get countries to do if they are not really willing. And none of this, to be really clear, none of this is an effort to keep the Singaporean government from attacking Malaysia or to keep the Dutch government from attacking France, right? This really always comes back to three countries, right? So if they are not held to account, if those three countries don't have if there's no leverage to compel them to behave better, this effort is wasted. So just coming up with a treaty is not going to work, right? And I think in the UN we saw that. It's the better part of 10 years of working in the UN didn't produce a treaty and didn't come nearer producing a treaty at the end of the process than at the beginning. So a norm is something that people agree represents their actual practice, right? So a norm is not a commitment to do something. It is a representation that this describes what we actually do and what we understand to be normal and right and what people should do in this situation. It's not something that gets formally signed up to. It's something that's used to describe your practices. So a norm says, we don't do X. But you don't say that unless you actually don't do X. You don't bother to lie about something like that because there are no stakes here. It's not like a treaty. So the GCSC's effort has been to develop a norm that describes non-aggression in cyberspace by governments against the private sector. Right? So last July, we split into two groups. One group is to say what the wording of the norm will be. What is it that's being precluded? What behavior do the countries that obey the norm agree not to do? The other group says what that applies to. What is it that people are agreeing not to attack? So those of us in the technical community are very interested in what are people agreeing not to attack. But there are only a couple of us on the commission. And so the vast majority of the commission is diplomats who don't think that's very interesting because, that's a bunch of technical mumbo-jumbo and, they're much more interested in doing what they know. So we had agreed to come back together, to bring these two pieces back together and produce a document in Delhi in November. And we got to Delhi in November, and the diplomats had their part all ready to go, and it was something like 5 pages long. And in a day of aggressive editing, we all got it down to 1 page, which is good. 1 page is short enough that people even politicians can be expected to read a one-page document and understand it if it's in straightforward language, which this was. It was a good document. Unfortunately, time ran out, and there wasn't time to really deal with the other working group, the what will this apply to? So the diplomats had a great suggestion. Why don't we just throw a little footnote down there saying that it applies to important stuff on the internet? That's good enough, right? Everybody will understand that. Important stuff on the internet? We think we know what that means, right? So we at least had a little bit of conversation during those 5 months or whatever, 4 months. The working group that was supposed to be figuring out what this applied to, which we were calling the Critical Infrastructure Working Group, although we don't use the phrase critical infrastructure because everybody thinks that they know what critical infrastructure means. And the problem is everybody's understanding of that is different than everybody else's, and so that promotes misunderstanding. Instead, we're using a phrase that the Dutch government came up with, which is the public core of the internet, because that's a neologism. It's a new phrase just coined. Nobody already thinks they know what's in the public core of the internet, which means that we can provide a definition, and that definition will be canonical. So that's what we're doing here. This working group is to provide a definition to the phrase, the public core of the internet. And so we did 2 rounds of surveys. The first round was among about 50 cybersecurity experts and core internet operations people. And we tried to come up with a huge list of all of the phrases that people thought might describe something that somebody wouldn't want attacked on the internet. And that got divided into 2 categories. One, which was parts of the internet itself, critical infrastructure of the internet. And the other category was, bear with me here, ICT-enabled and internet-accessible aspects of other critical infrastructure. So what does that mean? That means telemedicine, that means air traffic control, that means the control systems for nuclear power plants, all these things that people generally agree are critical infrastructure that are somehow accessible through the internet. So that distinction was necessary because there are a lot of people who were very certain that anything not to do with the internet itself was outside our mandate. Yet, security experts were very clear that this is all part of one problem. All of this is holistic. It is one big system. And if you protect one part of it and you don't protect other parts, then the attacks will just go to the part that you didn't protect. So we took that huge list and all of the experts' votes as to how relatively important each part of it was. And to give you an idea of what that looked like, we ranked everything from 0 to 10 in terms of criticality or importance. And the highest ranking thing averaged about, if I'm remembering right, about 9.6. And that was the internet accessible aspects of air traffic control. And the lowest ranking thing at I think about 1.7, 2, somewhere in there, was wealth management. So that at least, it's nice to see that internet security people aren't completely indebted to the 1% or whatever. Anyway, so then we took all of that and we organized it into a big tree hierarchy because that first big list included things that were very, very specific. The SKS key servers for PGP keys, and things that were very general, healthcare, right? And these are clearly different scopes. They're also orthogonal to each other, but they're different scopes. So we organized everything into a big tree where we could take a horizontal section through that tree and have things that were equally scoped, right, of similar scope despite being in different fields. And so we wound up with things like healthcare, navigation, communications, so forth, right? So these different sectors. And in the meeting in Delhi in November, what the majority decided, the majority of a group of 25 or so, of whom 2 were Internet Technical Community, was to take the top 4 out of, I think, 12 categories from the Internet side of it, and none of the non-Internet side. So the top 4 are packet routing and forwarding, naming and numbering systems, the cryptographic mechanisms of authentication and privacy, and physical transmission media. So what you're seeing on the slide here is fairly abbreviated. The examples, they're fairly abbreviated, about 50% shorter than what's on the actual document. The actual document is about 2/3 of a printed page. But it gives you the flavor of it. It's abbreviated, but nothing major has been deleted there. So these are the things that we think that there is consensus for protecting. The problem now is we need to get this made an official document. And of course, that's the next challenge with the GCSC process. In theory, this was going to happen at our meeting in Lille in January. But again, the diplomats' interests took a lot of time, and we wound up with, sort of the 5 minutes at the end of the day. And, this is an important issue and deserves further consideration, as you get at the end of a lot of meetings. So, insofar as I have a call to action for you guys, it's to think about this, think about whether the things that are described here are things that matter to you, whether you'd like to see work towards a norm that, say, all but 3 of the world's governments could happily accede to, that would say that they agreed that it was morally out of bounds and wrong to cyber attack these things, for a government to cyber attack these things. And if that's what you think, if you think we're going in the right direction, then talk with other members of the GCSC, talk with your foreign ministries, and express support for this. Beyond support, do what many of the major internet service providers are doing, which is to say, why isn't this already in there? Why isn't this in the document that you published in Delhi in November? Come on, get to it. We've got a 3-year scope for the GCSC. We've just passed 1 year now. And the rest of the norm got done, I would say, really well and very promptly by diplomatic standards. So there's no reason why this should lag. There's no reason why this should not be incorporated relatively quickly. That was the plan. The work has been done. The internet community has spoken. We'd like to see the benefits of that. So I think at this point, I'd like to see if there are any questions. We've got mics in the aisles, and I'm happy to talk about any of this stuff. We've got about 10 minutes left, maybe more like 5, I guess, given that you'll need to sort of wrap up and so forth. And I think there's some meeting housekeeping to do before the end of the hour. Anybody have any questions, anything they'd like me to clarify or address? I know this is Asia, and I know nobody wants to be the first one to get up and come up with a question, but... Really? Okay. Well, I will be here the rest of the morning, and I will be out in the hallway after this. I think the meeting room will be needed for the next meeting shortly after 10 o'clock, but I'll be there. If you'd rather ask questions privately, I'm very happy to address them. Thank you all very, very much for your time, And good luck with the meeting.
So thank you, Bill. So yes, definitely if you have questions, Bill will be outside in the hallway here if you'd like to connect with him in a more one-on-one setting. A little bit of housekeeping before we head out to the next session. The research I mentioned earlier, that's available for download if you go to the blackhat.com website and go to the Intel section there. It's available for free download. A couple of reminders for today and tomorrow. So we'd like to invite you to attend our welcome reception, which is happening in the business hall today. That's happening at 5 o'clock. Please come by for some food and refreshments. Our next briefing today will begin promptly at 10:15. Our day 2 keynote tomorrow, that'll happen at 9 o'clock in this same room, so we'll see you there. With that, we're glad you're here. We hope you'll take the most out of your week here and have a great week here at Black Hat. Thank you very much.